They say it takes roughly 5 to 6 ERP implementations in a company's life cycle to get the business results. In our first couple of implementations are always a challenge. The first one is the most challenging with the highest failure rate. So that's what we are going to discuss in this video. Hello, everyone. My name is Sam Gupta, and I am principal at Elevate IQ. Elevate IQ is the independent ERP and digital transformation consulting firm. We help our clients with the digital transformation strategy, business case development, and all the way to making sure that the implementation is going to be successful. Let's get back to today's topic, which is going to be the top 10 reasons why the first ERP implementation failed. Number 10 on our list is misunderstanding of architecture. There are misassumptions that companies are going to think that these architectural concepts, the IT concepts, are only for the bigger companies. The cloud has made things easier. So maybe the consultant that I am working with is going to overcomplicate things, and we probably don't need the architecture. Now, regardless of whether you are going to use any basic SaaS application or you are going to use a very complicated IT system, the architecture is still important. Architecture is not optional. And that is the issue that a lot of first time implementers struggle to understand. The second issue around architecture is going to be obviously the business user perspective is going to be super critical, super important. But if you are going to ignore the technical perspective, because for each of the requirement, you still have to assess the financial feasibility as well as the technical feasibility of the needs that your users are giving. So if you are completely ignoring the technical teams, if you are not listening to their concerns, then you have equal likelihood of failure. So you need to balance. You cannot have misalignment between your business users as well as technical teams. The other misunderstanding is going to be technology is just plug and play, especially with cloud. They are going to feel that they don't really need to invest any sort of resources. The only thing they really need to use any sort of cloud-based apps is going to be your credentials. That is further from truth. The more apps you are going to use, the more architecture is going to be important. Sure, you can use these apps technically, you might be able to do something, but if you are looking for business results, you will struggle in getting that unless you think of the architecture, how these apps are going to reconcile, what is going to be their sustainability, the maintenance path. So that's what you need to be thinking about. So don't ignore the architecture, don't ignore the tech perspective, and even the plug and play requires the architecture mindset. So that's number 10. Now, number 9 on our list is the internal skill set. You are going to hire the consultants. You are going to feel that I have hired really smart consultants and they are going to do everything for us. But your internal skill set is equally important, because ERP systems are not just the technical implementation. These people, the people who are going to be using the system, they are making the critical decisions about their processes and business, and they need to understand the implications of the decisions that the consultants are going to make on behalf of you. Their role is not really to make the decision, their role is to coach you in terms of what to look for in making the decision. If you have done a lot of ERP implementations, then obviously you are going to be far more equipped in terms of understanding, okay, why do we need to code these GL mappings at 1,000 places inside ERP? Why is it so complicated? Or why the customers need to be modeled with the GL code to be able to get the traceability that you are looking for from the ERP. And typically, when you are going to be first time implementer, you are probably going to be questioning everything. And then you are going to say, you know what, this is way too complicated. I don't need this. I am going to ignore the process. I'm going to ignore the data modeling, and I am going to do the way I understand. And this is where they really struggle. They are going to make these uninformed decisions, and because of that, they are not going to get the results. The other issues that we have around the internal skill set is the team misalignment, the lack of experience with similar initiatives. They just don't have that. The more experience that they get under their belt, the more they will be able to relate and connect with these decisions, the more informed they are going to be. So once you have 3, 4, 5, 6, then you probably know all of these decisions, how they fire back, and then you are not going to underestimate. Then you will be able to connect with the consultants a lot more. You'll be able to see things from their perspective. And then power struggle. So even if, let's say, the champion or the sponsor are agreeing on a specific issue, and let's say if the team does not agree or they are not willing to give away a specific process or the data set that is required for the feasibility of the architecture, you are still going to have issues. So power struggle is another issue that is very common in the case of teams that are implementing this for the first time. So a quick recommendation around this issue is going to be provide them cross-functional visibility. In most cases, when companies implement this for the first time, most of the resources, they don't really have the cross-functional visibility. The founder is probably managing all of the processes. So it's really up to the founder and the leadership how they are going to communicate, coach their teams, and provide their visibility why these things matter. Now, if the founder has a lot of experience with the ERP implementation, it'll be easier because they'll be able to coach, they'll be able to communicate, they'll be able to connect. But typically what happens is even the founder or the CEO or the leader struggle to connect and understand, and they are going to underestimate the process, and finally they are not going to get the results because of that limited experience. So the other recommendation that are there around this issue is going to be hire experienced team members. The more experience you have in your team, and sometimes there might be budgetary issues in terms of what you can afford, but at least listen to the consultants, because you have hired these consultants. They have seen every single team out there, so at least listen to them, what they are trying to say, and try to understand, try to research on your own. The more research you are going to do, you are going to feel in your heart that I'm already paying these guys, so why am I researching? And obviously you are going to be limited on time as well, so it's a big challenge. But the more time you spend, the better the implementation is going to be, the superior business results you are going to get from your ERP. But if you are not able to resolve the issues such as power struggle, then the technology cannot do everything. So you need to think about other measures such as your compensation. So change the compensation structure, because everything is sort of connected. And if your users are not going to see the personal benefit from your ERP, they might not cooperate with you. They might not be committed to the implementation. They might say that, they might pretend that they are committed, but they might not. So that's why the internal skill set is the reason why the first time ERP implementations fail. Now, number 8 on our list is the stakeholder commitment. When anybody is implementing this for the first time, for them, it's going to be a technology project. They are going to make comments such as, hey, once we give it to the technology teams, they can figure out everything. What we really need to do is we need to tell them what needs to be done. As long as we are doing the customer surveys, technology teams can code anything and everything. That's not how the technology implementations work. With technology implementation, everything is connected. The way your data is going to be coded, the way your processes are going to be coded, and that drives what is going to be the cost of the implementation and whether the implementation is going to work or not. Sometimes things might not even be possible from the technical perspective, and the technical teams and the developers and the IT teams, they have tendency to say yes to everything. They are going to say, yes, you know what, I am going to try, I am going to solve this problem, but they might not realize how difficult it might get, or the model that they might be thinking may not scale for some of the requirements that you or them they didn't think of. So that's where the scalability issues are going to be there. So again, for these projects, what you need to do is you need to align the technical perspective as well as the business perspective, and you need to analyze comprehensively what is going to be easier. Is it going to be the process or data? If you fix that, can we make the implementation easier? And that's where the stakeholder commitment is going to be super critical, because you need that person who can make these decisions in the cross-functional manner. Because if you are going to have just the functional teams, they are all going to be pulling the architecture in their direction, and then because of that, you are going to get a lot of issues. Now, the other issues that we see around stakeholder commitment is going to be they can't balance how much to get involved. Sometimes they are going to take very hand-off approach, and sometimes they are going to be micromanaging the hell out of the team that it's going to stress everyone out there in these teams. So you need to figure out a model, and you need to let the consultants help in building that model, in what inputs are they going to require from your side. But you need to be a little flexible in terms of how this thing is going to work, because obviously they might not know about everything. So the model can be based on per project. You need to figure out what is going to work for you. The other issue that we see is can't build the consensus, and that's where the leadership skills are going to be in play. So you, as the CEO or the leader or whoever is playing the role of that cross-functional leader who has the authority as well as the knowledge to be able to act as the cross-functional leader, need to help consultants build the consensus. Since consultants are not really part of your business, it's just harder for them to be able to help. They might have tools that they might be able to utilize, but if they are not given enough authority, there's only so much that they can do. And that's where you, as the leader, need to provide them resources as well as control that they are able to do their jobs. Now, some recommendation in terms of how to solve these issues is going to be, don't take the handoff approach for ERP implementation. It does not work. Strike balance between the how much commitment you want to have for the team and then showing them. Design the processes. The more you are going to show them, the more they are going to understand the issues for the other people because of their decisions, and then they might agree with it. So that's number 8. Now, number 7 on our list is going to be process re-engineering. And the issues around process re-engineering are related to the first-time implementers. They don't necessarily document the process. Even if they are going to document, they are not going to have the sufficient details that are going to matter for the users as well as for the technical teams. Sometimes they might design the processes from the user's perspective, but for technical teams, that is not as meaningful because the kind of details that they look for. Sometimes you are going to have the implied expectations in your head because you already know so much about the business. You are not going to spell out the details that a new person who is joining the team for the first time is going to need. Then you might not cooperate with them because you are thinking again in your head that you have provided a lot of details, but they are still not able to follow along. So you need to think of this as, let's say if you have a person joining your team, you are probably investing roughly 2 to 3 months in training them, in coaching them about your business, about your processes before you can get anything out of them. And if you don't do that, they are going to make a lot of assumptions. They are going to build the model based on those assumptions. And then finally, it might not come out to be the way you were thinking in your head. And then you need to, again, go into those iterations. And that typically adds up with the implementation. The other issues around this is going to be not willing to change the proprietary processes. That is also very critical issue that we see typically with the first time implementers. These processes are going to be near and dear to people's heart. Sometimes they might not change because they might lose a substantial power in the organization. They might not be willing to do that. Sometimes they are going to argue that this is not going to cause any sort of issues, but obviously they are not really expert of the architecture, so they might not be able to foresee all of these things, and the consultants might not be able to express or explain or articulate. The reason for that is because these things are really complex. It's very, very, very hard to describe what implications you are going to get, and sometimes they are simply going to give up and they are going to just move forward with whatever you want to do, and then you are going to not get the implementation the way it could have been done if you sort of agreed with them or if you could foresee what they were trying to recommend. So some of the recommendation, the more you are going to draw, the more expertise you are going to get. Hire subject matter experts who have drawn these processes to the sufficient details that is going to be meaningful for the users as well as for the technical teams. And for any sort of proprietary processes, build the detailed technical as well as functional specs and compare the architecture and the cost of building the architecture in both cases. And then only these people will understand that, okay, just by keeping this proprietary process, we are losing $1 million. Is it worth doing that? But again, that requires far deeper analysis. That could be a project in itself, and you might need to invest, let's say, $10,000 just for that discovery. So again, depending upon whatever is easiest and wherever you might be in your journey, you might need to invest in all of that. So that's number 7. Now, number 6 on our list is data re-engineering. And the issues around data re-engineering is going to be typically most first-time implementers, they don't have experience with data modeling. They might not even have a CFO, controller, CIO, or chief supply chain officer that can talk about how the codings work in many different ERP systems. And even if they have some experience with data modeling, they are not going to know the implications of how the GL codes need to be mapped when you are going to be mapping any sort of SKUs, what implications they are going to have in the downstream processes, on your financial statements, on your data, on your scheduling, on your costing. So these are some of the details that come with the experience. Data is going to drive the over customization of your software. The way your data is going to be coded, the way your processes are going to be, that is going to dictate whether you are going to get results from your ERP system or not. And this requires a lot of expertise. So first, you need to be changing your data in the technology agnostic manner before you implement any sort of ERP. Otherwise, it's going to be really tricky to get the results, even if you have the shiniest object from the technology perspective. Now, the other issues that we see with data re-engineering is can't really connect the dots how these trivial decisions are going to fire back. Typically, every single executive and the user is going to be at the 30,000 foot level. So they cannot really see these things. It's very hard. It's very hard to articulate. So unless you put it on a paper, and putting on paper also requires a lot of investment, because then you are trying to document every single process. And that's why the ERP implementation are so difficult, because you need to make them understand why these decisions are going to fire back when we implement the ERP. Or what is going to happen is you are going to be implementing multiple times, and then your implementation budget is going to be much higher. And that is the issue that we see with the first time implementers. The other issue that we see is the limited understanding of how source of authority is supposed to work. Source of authority is a very complex technical concept that you need to understand, you need to model, you need to design. And unless you have the source of authority figured out, you are going to have significant reconciliation issues across the system, data quality issues across the system. The admin effort, the variances that you are going to get across the processes are going to be substantial. So you are looking at all of that. Now, your internal users are probably not going to have experience in designing the source of authority workflows. So some of the recommendations that we have for this is take baby steps. It does take a couple of implementations before you sort of start understanding these things. So either you do the research by yourself, or you figure out how to work with the consultants, then only you can be successful with your first couple of implementations. But take baby step in data modeling, analyze the skill set of your team, what they might be able to digest. If you are going to be installing, let's say, SAP right after a spreadsheet, it's just too much. So you need to take baby step in terms of what is going to be the journey, so that people can learn the data modeling in the basic steps and take that accordingly. Now, the other recommendation is try to research and compare with the other industries. Try to visualize how they are doing things, why they have done things in a certain way, and if the same thing can be utilized for your processes as well. But again, let consultants make the decision. Your job is going to be just to understand, map out the data flows at the field level. The more mapping you are going to do in discovery phase, the more you are going to understand the implications. And if you don't map out these data flows in the discovery phase, sometimes even the ERP OEMs or resellers, they cannot do anything, because they are going to say that, you know what, you have never provided these details to me, and that's not part of the SOW. So what can I do? So the fault is going to be really on you, because you did not provide the details. Your assumption is going to be that I am hiring this vendor, I am hiring this consultants, and they should be able to figure these things out. But it's just hard. It's hard. So again, the more exercise that you are going to be doing on a piece of paper, the more information you are going to have with you, the more informed decisions that you can make for yourself. But first time implementers typically struggle with that. So that's number 6. Number 5 is going to be change management. And change management in general is a very broad topic. Every single change that you are going to do, whether that's going to be technical or it's going to be in your processes or data, that is going to have implications on so many different things. Sometimes the technical team is going to ask, hey, if you could change your SKU numbering strategy, or the way you are configuring your license plate right now, the implementation could be really simple or simpler, but that requires changing with the customer communication or the way you might be printing your SKU on a packaging. So these things could be very interconnected, And now, if you are not willing to change that, and if you are saying that, hey, technical guys, I know you guys are smart, I have hired you, and you guys can figure these things out, and they are going to obviously take that as a challenge, and they are going to create something that is probably not going to scale, that is probably not going to work. So that's why it is very important to understand and document every single change and understand the implications. And some of these changes could be a project in itself that requires coordination with your business teams, with your customers, with your vendors, if they are going to impact your joint forecasting. So change management in general is a topic that your first time implementers are going to struggle. So the issues that we see around change management is going to be finding the change management company right after the selection. Selection is great. Even if you select the right tool, it may never work for you, okay? And the reason why it is not going to work for you is because the change management requires the continuous measurement and continuous sort of identification of where the changes are. And if the first set of changes that you had identified, you need to make sure that they are being captured correctly. The plan is going to be there for each of those change. So that has to be throughout the process. The change management is not going to be done right after the selection. So if you hired a company that only does the selection and they don't really do the change management, then you are still going to probably face the issues. So the other issues that we see around this one is hiring the change management company without subject matter expertise. Now, change management for a construction project could be very different than a change management for an ERP project. So the subject matter expertise is still very important. Even for the change management expert, they need to understand how ERP industry works. They need to understand how each of the ERP tools work. They might not be the product experts, but they need to know enough to be able to talk to the technical teams, to be able to write the pseudocode, to be able to vet their assumptions. They need to have that. So subject matter expertise is still important. Not able to make personal or compensation changes to drive behavior. That's also a big issue that we see with the first time implementer. They always say that, hey, my business is easy. My business does not require any sort of changes. The problem is in your tool that's not working as per my expectations. And that could be a little back and forth between both parties, and it's not going to help anybody. So if you really want to make changes to your processes and data, you need to make sure that compensation as well as the personnel are going to be aligned with your strategy. Otherwise, the users are never going to adopt the system. So that's number 5. Now, number 4 is the pre-selection phase. Most of the first-time implementers, they struggle to understand the value of pre-selection phase. And the reason for that is they are going to feel that, you know what, I am already working with these resellers, OEMs. They are showing me the product. I have already documented all of the requirements, and I am probably going to lead this selection by myself. Typically, in the pre-selection phase, what you are doing, you are not just documenting the requirements. You are doing a lot more. You are digging on these requirements, how they are going to work. So literally, if you really think about the importance of pre-selection phase, what you are trying to do, you are trying to implement the whole ERP on a piece of paper before you sign the contract. That's the intent of pre-selection phase, which is way harder than actually implementing, playing with a tool. Okay, once you have the specs defined, then it becomes much easier to be able to test, to be able to implement. Think of this as more of the IKEA assembly. For example, let's say if you are simply following the instructions on the IKEA assembly, it's just easier to follow. But the person who has created those instructions on the IKEA assembly is where the real rocket science is. And that's the importance of pre-selection phase. So some of the issues that we see around the pre-selection phase is thinking pre-selection phase as the sunk cost, not involving users during the design phase. How much do you need to invest in the pre-selection phase is also a question always the companies have. The more you are going to invest, the shorter your implementation is going to be, the fewer issues you are going to get, the fewer surprises you are going to get during the implementation. Now, the recommendation around pre-selection phase is going to be pre-selection is not optional. Involve users from day one. Build a language that is going to help them understand the to-be processes. That's really critical. Invest more in the pre-selection phase because that is actually going to shorten the implementation. Regardless of whether you have the pre-selection phase or not, your total cost is probably going to be similar, but you can avoid those $1 million disasters by having pre-selection phase. But the first time implementers really struggle to have that. So that's number 4. number 3 on our list is the internal selection process. And the issues around the internal selection process that we see is hiring interns to lead the selection process. Even though you might feel that why do you need expertise to lead the selection? But again, what you are doing in the implementation process is you are literally trying to implement the ERP. And even the people who have been implementing ERP for many years, for them, it's hard to implement that on a piece of paper. And that's what you are doing as part of your pre-selection phase or during the selection phase. And if you are going to ask your intern to do that, they are going to miss critical details. Some of the examples that we see in working with interns is they are going to say, hey, you know what? I am looking for a connector for Salesforce as part of ERP, but they miss critical details. Each connector designed for a specific version for the specific technology set. So let's say even if the ERP systems that you might be thinking of choosing, even though the integration might be supported for 9.0, it might not be there for 10.0, but the ERP that you are buying requires 10.0. So again, this is just one example. There could be millions and millions of variables like this that you need to pay attention to, and that in turn is never going to have expertise. In fact, I mean, see, if they are going to be researching based on Google, there is going to be so much noise and they are going to be so confused, and that is going to drive your entire selection as well as implementation. The other issues that we see around this is the following the traditional selection process. You can only see so much in the demo. There's no way you can figure out what is going on with the ERP system during the demo. Even the experts who have been doing this for 20 years struggle to see this. For them, it's very hard to move from one screen to the next. That's how much challenging an ERP system could get. So if you're simply following the traditional selection process, where you have a bunch of technical functional specs that you are trying to confirm, and then you are going for the demo, you are probably going to make the wrong decision about your ERP selection. Then the other issue that we see is trusting ERP reseller or the freelancer with, let's say, one or a couple of implementation for the ERP selection guidance. Now, the resellers, they typically are going to have the NDA with their OEMs. They are not going to have any other solutions. They might carry, let's say, one or two or three, but they are not going to have any sort of insight into the competing solution because they are not sitting in these demos with many different solutions on a daily basis to be able to understand these issues. So if you are going to take their advice, obviously their perspective is going to be biased because they only know a couple of solutions and they are going to be thinking from that perspective, and they are incentivized to sell their products, and that's why they are spending time with you. So if you're taking the ERP selection guidance from a reseller, that's not gonna help you. The freelancer is a similar example. If you are taking help from them, they may have implemented a couple of ERP systems. You can only know so much about the data model of these ERP systems by implementing just a couple. So if you are going to take their advice, it's probably going to mislead you. So that's number 3. Now, number 2 on our list is underestimating the effort. The first time implementers, they typically don't understand the implications around ERP. Sometimes they are going to feel that, you know what, it's all noise. The ERP may not be as difficult. They are going to look for the shortcuts. They are always going to feel, and most of the first time implementers are going to be entrepreneurs. They could build the business by challenging the bigger players in the market. So obviously they have this feeling in their heart that they can figure anything out in the world. But when you look at the ERP implementations, things are a little different because here you are not only trying to standardize the processes, you are working with people, you are working with experts. The kind of implications that you are going to have on your business processes are really at a different level. So the same disruptor mindset that made you successful in building the business might fire back in the case of your ERP implementation. And that's what happens with most of the entrepreneurs or the first time implementers, because they are going to be looking for the shortcuts. They are going to be fixated on the budget. There is no easy way of implementing the ERP. You have to go through the boring, dull process of doing the detailed discovery to be able to make the informed decisions for your ERP. And if most consultants are saying that it's going to cost $1 million, then it's probably going to cost $1 million. Again, there is no shortcut around that. So don't underestimate the efforts. The other challenges that we see around this particular issue is the custom solution is the answer for everything. Sometimes the problem is going to be in their data coding, the way their data is coded, and they are going to feel, you know what, if these ERP systems are so difficult to learn, why can't we have our own custom software that we are going to build? If you are going to ask a developer, they are going to say, you know what, I can build anything and everything. But they also underestimate the scalability requirements of an enterprise software in general. They might be able to model a couple of scenarios, but when you are modeling the whole business, the whole enterprise, every single transaction that you are going to have, it's very, 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 very complex, and getting that on a custom software is extremely difficult. And if you really feel that custom software is the answer, then try to document all your processes. That itself is very difficult, and that is going to be the first step in designing a custom software. So if you cannot do that, you will never be successful with a custom software. Now, some of the recommendations that we are going to have around this issue is budget drives quality. You get what you pay for. So if you are cutting corners on your budget, make sure you understand where you are going to compromise. The shortcuts don't really exist with ERP, so don't look for shortcut. Try to understand the processes. Try to understand why the consultants are charging more and why it is so difficult. So that's number 2. Now, number 1 on our list is the coachability. And coachability is going to be overall from the leadership skills perspective. Most of the first time implementers struggle to work with the consultants. And the reason for that is because they don't really have as much experience working with the knowledge workers, especially if you are going to be in the industrial sector. They might never have worked with the knowledge workers, and they don't really know what inputs these guys are going to be needing to be successful. So a couple of issues that we see with the coachability is not listening to the consultants, not willing to provide the right details that they are going to need to do their job. And if you don't provide them, they are simply going to make the assumptions. They are going to move on. They are going to build something. And in most cases, you are probably not going to like that, but they are trying to do their job. And if you work with them, if you provide them the right details, then they will be able to avoid all of these rinse and repeat scenarios that could be avoided by providing the right details. Then, not doing the homework required. The ERP implementation always is going to require a lot of commitment from your side, because you are the one who is going to be flying this spaceship. And there is no way for ERP consultant to be able to coach unless you have the commitment, unless you are willing to learn. Every single of your user need to have the skill set as well as the appetite and willingness to learn and do the homework with the right amount of attention that the ERP systems require. If they don't have that, then you are probably going to struggle with your implementation. So that's it for this video. If you enjoyed this one, then we are going to include the link of the detailed article in the comments, so you may want to check that. If you like what I say, we publish these videos on a weekly basis, so you might want to hit the subscribe button on YouTube. If you prefer audio format, we also have this podcast available on Apple, Google, and Spotify, so you might want to subscribe there. And if you have not checked our digital transformation report for 2023, we are going to include the link in the comments, so check that out. On that note, thanks for tuning in. I'll see you in the next one.